The night was silent, except for the soft crackle of fire and the faint hiss of cooling metal. The battlefield was empty now. Only broken machines and the smell of smoke remained. Among the shadows, a human traveler named Daniel walked slowly, his boots pressing against the ash-covered ground. He had seen battles before. He had seen death. But this time, something felt different. As he moved past a collapsed wall, he heard a sound, a weak cry, almost like a whisper. He stopped, hand on his weapon, eyes scanning the ruins. Another sound came, a soft whimper filled with fear. Daniel followed the noise until he saw her. A small alien girl sat chained to a broken support beam, her wrists bound by metal cuffs. Her skin glowed faintly in the firelight, pale blue with strange marks that shimmered like silver. Her large dark eyes widened as soon as she saw the human. She pulled against her chains, trembling, expecting the worst. She thought he would kill her just like others had done before. Her breath shook, and she pressed herself against the wall, trying to make herself disappear. Her lips moved quickly, in her own tongue, begging him to make it quick. To her, death by a human's hand was better than being left in chains. Daniel did not move closer at first. He just stood there, staring at her, his face unreadable in the firelight. His hand rested on his weapon, and the girl shut her eyes tight, waiting for the strike. But nothing came. Minutes passed like hours. When she dared to open her eyes again, the human was kneeling. He was not pointing his weapon at her. He was studying the cuffs around her wrists. His brows were furrowed, his jaw tight, as if he was deciding something very heavy. The alien girl's heart pounded harder. Why was he so close? Why was he not killing her? Her people had always told her humans were monsters, ruthless killers who felt no mercy. But here one was, silent and thoughtful. Daniel reached into his bag, pulling out a small tool. The girl flinched, thinking it was some cruel weapon. But, instead of hurting her, he pressed the tool against the lock of her chains. A spark hissed, the metal cracked, and suddenly, one of her wrists was free. Her eyes widened, her breath caught. She did not understand. Why would an enemy free her? The human's face showed no cruelty, no smile of power, only focus. He worked on the second cuff, and within seconds both chains fell to the ground. The girl rubbed her wrists, staring at him with disbelief. She whispered in her language, "Why?" Though she knew he could not understand, Daniel looked at her, his eyes steady. Then he slowly placed the tool back into his bag. He offered her no words, only silence, but his silence was not cold. It was strange, almost protective. The girl thought of running, but her body was weak. She had not eaten in days, her legs could barely carry her weight. When she tried to stand, she stumbled, almost falling. But the human's hand caught her before she hit the ground. She froze at his touch, waiting for pain, waiting for cruelty. Instead, he gently helped her back onto her feet. His grip was firm but not harsh, guiding her instead of forcing her. Her heart raced in confusion. Why was this happening? The silence between them was heavy, filled with questions. The firelight flickered over their faces, hers pale with fear, his calm but unreadable. Finally, Daniel spoke a few words in his own tongue. She did not understand them, but his tone was soft, not threatening. For the first time in her life, she saw a human not as an enemy, but as something she could not yet explain. Her fear did not vanish, but it cracked, just a little. And in that crack, something dangerous began to grow. Hope. She had expected death, pain, or chains, but this human had done something completely different. And now she wondered, what did he want from her? Why would he risk helping her at all? The night grew darker, the fire burned lower. Two figures, one human, one alien, stood in the ruins, bound by an unexpected choice. Neither of them knew what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was certain. The story was only just beginning. The ruins were quiet. Only the wind moved through the broken walls. The alien girl sat near the dim fire the human had made, her thin body shaking from cold and fear. She pulled her knees close to her chest, her wide eyes never leaving him. Every sound he made, a shift of his boots, the crackle of firewood, made her flinch. She still thought he would kill her. Maybe he was just waiting for the right moment. Maybe freeing her from the chains was only to trick her. Her people had warned her. Humans enjoy watching hope before crushing it. Daniel sat a few steps away, sharpening his blade with calm hands. The sound of steel against stone echoed in the night, sharp and steady. To her it was the sound of death being prepared. Her heart raced, her breath quickened. She whispered to herself in her own language, "Do it quickly. Please, don't let it hurt." But the human never moved toward her. He only worked on his weapon as if she wasn't there. Minutes turned into hours. Her stomach growled loudly, the sound betraying her hunger. The human's eyes lifted for a moment. Meeting hers, she froze like a hunted animal. Then, to her shock, he reached into his pack. He pulled out a small piece of bread, hard and dry. He placed it on the ground between them and pushed it closer with the edge of his knife. Then he leaned back, saying nothing. The girl stared at it, confused. Was it poisoned? Was it a trap? Her body screamed with hunger, but her mind told her to stay away. She shook her head violently, refusing. Daniel did not insist. He only shrugged and turned back to his blade. The bread lay untouched on the dirt, but the smell drifted toward her nose, warm and cruel in its temptation. Her hands trembled. Every second that passed made her weaker. Finally, with slow movements, she reached forward and grabbed it. She shoved the bread into her mouth, eating like someone who had not tasted food in days. The human did not laugh, did not mock her. He only watched silently, his face calm. The girl's eyes filled with tears as she chewed. She hated herself for needing the food, but she hated her fear even more. When she finished, she lowered her head. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Why?" Though she knew he would not understand, her question was simple but heavy. Why free her? Why feed her? Why not kill her? Daniel placed the stone aside. He spoke in his tongue, slow and low, his voice gentle. She could not understand the words, but she felt the weight in his tone. It was not the voice of a killer. It was the voice of someone trying to calm a storm. Still, fear clung to her like chains. She remembered the screams of her people, the burning of her village. She remembered the stories. Humans take, humans break, humans destroy. So what was this one doing here? Offering her food instead of death? Her broken fear twisted inside her chest. Part of her wanted to run into the night away from him, but another part whispered that she would not survive without him, and that thought terrified her even more. Later, as the fire burned low, Daniel laid down on the ground, his weapon close by. He turned his back to her, closing his eyes. She stared at him in shock. How could he trust her like that? She was his enemy, wasn't she? The night grew colder. She wrapped her thin arms around herself, shivering. She thought of crawling away, disappearing into the darkness. But her legs had no strength, her body too weak. Her eyes stayed fixed on the human's back. Every rise and fall of his breath made her more restless. Why wasn't he guarding her? Why wasn't he chaining her again? Why had he left her free? Hours passed, the silence stretching like a blade. The alien girl did not sleep, her mind torn between fear and strange curiosity, and when dawn finally came, the first rays of light touched the ruins. She realized something. Her fear had not vanished, but it had broken. It was no longer a cage around her heart. Now it was a question, sharp and dangerous if he was not her enemy. Then who was he? The human stirred awake, his eyes meeting hers once again. No smile, no threat, only a calm nod. And in that small gesture, she felt something she had never expected to feel from a human. Safety. She lowered her head quickly, hiding her face. Her hands gripped the ground, her breath shaking. She did not trust him yet, she could not. But deep inside, her broken fear had left room for something new to grow. Hope, fragile but alive. And that was far more dangerous than chains.
The sun rose over the broken battlefield, lighting the ruins with pale gold. The human Daniel walked ahead, his heavy boots crunching over stones. Behind him, the alien girl followed slowly, her steps unsteady, her eyes always watching him. She still feared him, but something inside her whispered that staying close was safer than being alone. She wrapped her thin arms around herself, her body trembling in the morning air. Every time Daniel turned his head, she lowered her gaze quickly. She did not want him to see the fear in her eyes. But she also could not stop staring at the strange man who had spared her life. They walked for hours in silence. The girl's legs ached, her body weak from hunger and wounds. Daniel slowed his steps when she stumbled, though he never offered his hand again. It confused her. Why did he care enough to slow down, but not enough to speak? At last, they reached the edge of a forest. The trees stood tall, leaves whispering in the wind. Here the air smelled clean, filled with life instead of smoke. Daniel stopped, scanning the area carefully, his hand near his weapon. The girl froze too, her heart racing. Was he searching for enemies? Was he planning to leave her here? But instead he moved deeper into the forest, leading her into the shadows of green. She hesitated, then followed, her fear urging her not to lose sight of him. They came to a small clearing where a ruined cabin stood, half broken but still standing. Daniel pushed open the wooden door, the sound creaking through the silence. Dust and old leaves covered the floor, but it was shelter. The girl stood at the doorway, unsure if she was allowed to enter. Daniel looked back, his eyes meeting hers. Then he stepped aside, giving her space. She swallowed hard and walked in slowly, every step careful. Her heart pounded as if she had walked into a trap. Inside, the cabin was dark, but safe from the wind. Daniel dropped his pack on the ground and began setting up a fire in the broken hearth. The girl watched him, her mind spinning with questions. Why was he doing this? Why bring her here? She wanted to ask, but fear tied her tongue. Instead, she sat in the corner, knees pulled to her chest, eyes never leaving him. The silence between them was thick, heavy with things unsaid. The only sound was the crackle of fire when it finally came to life. Warmth spread through the cabin. The girl closed her eyes for a moment, her body relaxing against her will. She hated that she felt comfort in the presence of a human, yet she could not deny that for the first time in days, she was not shivering. Daniel pulled out another piece of bread, breaking it in half. He ate one half and left the other on a flat stone near her. The girl stared at it, torn between pride and hunger. Finally, she reached out and took it, her hands shaking. She ate slower this time, her eyes lifting to him now and then. He did not stare at her, did not demand anything in return. He only sat near the fire, his face calm. That calmness unsettled her more than cruelty ever could. When night came, Daniel spread out his blanket on the floor. He lay down with his weapon within reach. The girl's heart raced again. What if he attacked her while she slept? But she was too weak to stay awake, her body giving in. She curled into herself in the corner, eyes growing heavy. Her last sight before sleep was the glow of the fire on his face. And his face was not the face of a monster. It was the face of someone carrying a burden she could not name. In the middle of the night, a sound woke her. She opened her eyes to see Daniel sitting upright, his hand on his weapon. He listened carefully, his body tense. The girl froze, every muscle in her body tight with fear. Outside, branches cracked, heavy foots. Steps moved near the cabin. She held her breath, heart racing like a trapped bird. Daniel raised a finger to his lips, signaling her to stay silent. His eyes locked on hers, sharp, commanding, but not cruel. For the first time, she obeyed a human's command without hesitation. She pressed her back against the wall, staying still as a shadow. The noises outside grew louder, closer. Something, or someone, was hunting. Daniel gripped his weapon tighter, ready to defend the small shelter. The girl's fear twisted into something strange. She realized that if danger entered, he would fight not just for himself, but for her too. The thought both terrified and comforted her. The footsteps outside paused, then slowly faded into the distance. The forest grew quiet again. Only the sound of leaves moving in the wind remained. Daniel lowered his weapon but stayed alert. The girl let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The silence after danger was heavy. In that silence, she looked at him differently, not as a killer, not as a savior, but as something in between, someone she could not understand, yet could not pull away from. She closed her eyes again, finally drifting into uneasy sleep. But deep inside, something had changed. The shelter was not just a cabin. It had become a fragile bridge between them, and that bridge would soon be tested by the world outside. The cabin was quiet, the fire only glowing faintly in the morning light. Daniel rose first, his movement steady, his face calm as always. The alien girl stirred slowly, her body stiff from sleeping on the hard floor. When she tried to sit up, a sharp pain shot through her arm. She gasped, clutching it, and Daniel's head turned instantly. Her heart froze, fear rushing back. She pulled her arm close to her chest, hiding it under her thin clothes. But Daniel had already seen. His eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in concern. He moved closer and she backed away quickly, pressing against the wall. Her breath came fast, her eyes wide. He stopped just an arm's length away, kneeling low so his height would not scare her. Slowly, he lifted one hand, palm open, showing he carried nothing. The girl trembled, unsure what he wanted. She shook her head again and again, whispering in her tongue, "Don't touch me. Don't hurt me." But Daniel did not leave. Instead, he reached into his pack and pulled out a small cloth and a metal flask. He poured clear water onto the cloth and held it out, his eyes locked on hers, patient but firm. He was asking without words. Her arm throbbed, the hidden wound burning. She knew she could not keep it secret for long. Slowly, with shaking hands, she pulled back her sleeve. The skin beneath was torn, bruised, and marked with cruel burns from the chains. Daniel's jaw tightened, his face hardening at the sight, but his touch, when he reached forward, was careful. He pressed the damp cloth gently against her arm. The girl flinched, expecting pain, but the cool water soothed instead. Tears pricked her eyes. She hated that her enemy was the one easing her pain. Every gentle movement of his hand broke the walls her people had built in her heart, walls that had told her humans were monsters. She bit her lip, refusing to cry, but the sting of the wounds mixed with the kindness of his touch was too much. A single tear slipped down her cheek. She turned her face away, ashamed. Daniel said something in his language, his voice low, steady, almost like a promise. She could not understand the words, but she felt the meaning. He was not going to hurt her, not now, not ever. When he finished cleaning the wound, he wrapped it with a strip of cloth. He tied it carefully, making sure it was not too tight. Then he leaned back, giving her space again. The girl stared at her arm, disbelief written across her face. Why? Why would a human heal her? Her people had always said humans only caused pain, yet this one was all as different. And the more she saw it, the more her fear cracked. But cracks also let in danger, because now she felt something new. Confusion. If he was not her enemy, then who was he to her? What did he want from her in return? Later that day, Daniel stepped outside to gather wood. The girl sat alone in the cabin, staring at her arm. She touched the bandage lightly, her chest tight with emotions she did not understand. She remembered the soldiers of her kind who had laughed at her weakness. They had left her behind in chains like trash. And now, here was a human, the one she was supposed to hate, the only one who had shown her care. The thought twisted inside her, her fear of him mixed with a strange pull toward him. When Daniel returned, his arms full of branches, he found her watching him, her eyes sharp, but not only with fear. She quickly looked away, but he had seen the question in her gaze. She wanted answers, but did not know how to ask. That night, as the fire burned bright, she finally spoke. Her voice was weak, but she whispered one word in her language. Why? It was the only word she could manage, but it carried all her confusion. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Then he spoke in his own tongue, his words calm and slow. She could not understand them, but his face softened, his eyes steady, his tone filled with something she had never heard from a human. Compassion. She lowered her head, pressing her arms against her knees. She wanted to believe him, but the voices of her people still echoed inside her mind. Humans are monsters. Humans are killers. Yet none of those voices matched the man sitting in front of her. The silence stretched long. But this time, it was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of change. The girl's broken fear was turning into something dangerous, something her people would never forgive. Trust. When she finally lay down to sleep, her body curled close to the fire, not far from him. Her mind whispered a warning, but her heart whispered something else. Maybe, just maybe, he was not her enemy at all. The forest was quiet but not peaceful. Every sound felt sharper. Every whisper of wind carried weight. Daniel sensed it first, the strange stillness that told him danger was near. He stood outside the cabin, scanning the trees, his hand resting on his weapon. Inside, the alien girl watched him from the doorway. She noticed how his body stiffened, how his eyes searched the shadows. Fear spread through her chest, sharp and cold. She knew the silence. It was the silence before hunters struck. Daniel motioned for her to stay inside. His gesture was firm, protective, not harsh, but her heart pounded faster because she already knew who it was. Her own people were near. Moments later, the sound came. Branches snapped. Voices whispered in a tongue she understood. 3 tall figures moved between the trees, their armor dark, their weapons ready. Her kin. Soldiers of her race, searching for survivors. The girl's body shook with confusion. These were her people, her blood. Yet the sight of them filled her with dread. Would they save her, or chain her again? Her eyes darted to Daniel, who now stood firm in front of the cabin. The soldiers saw him, and their voices turned sharp. They raised their weapons, ready to strike the human down. The girl gasped, stepping forward, but Daniel raised his hand to stop her. He stood tall, his eyes steady as if saying, "If you want her, you'll have to go through me." Her heart twisted. Why was he protecting her? He had no reason, no gain, yet here he was, risking his life for hers. One of the soldiers shouted. The girl understood the words clearly. "Give us the weak one, human. She belongs to us." Belongs. The words struck like a blade. She remembered the chains, the laughter, the way they had abandoned her. Her chest tightened. Was she really theirs? Or was she something else now, something different? Because of the man who stood before her? Daniel said something in his tongue. His voice was strong, his hand gripping his weapon tightly. The soldiers did not understand his words, but his stance was clear. He would not surrender her. The first soldier stepped forward, his blade gleaming. The girl's breath caught, fear exploding inside her. She wanted to scream, to beg them to stop, but her voice died in her throat. Daniel moved like stone and fire, his weapon raised. The soldiers hesitated, surprised by his boldness. He was only one man, yet his eyes burned with a fire that made 3 warriors pause. It was the fire of someone who would fight to the last breath. The girl's fear battled her heart. Her people had left her to die. But this human had freed her, fed her, healed her, and now shielded her. Her choice was tearing her apart, side with her kin, or side with the stranger who acted more like family than they ever had. The tension thickened, every second heavy like stone. The soldiers circled closer. The girl stepped out of the cabin, her body trembling, her voice small but desperate. "Stop!" she cried in her language. Her kin froze for a moment, hearing her voice. She pointed to Daniel, her hands shaking. He is not the enemy," she said, though her words felt dangerous. The soldiers looked at her with shock, then anger. "Has he broken you?" One snarled. "Has the human poisoned your mind?" Her throat tightened, tears in her eyes. She wanted to deny it, to stay silent, but her heart forced the truth from her lips. "No, he saved me." Daniel could not understand her words, but he understood her tone, the way she stood closer to him than to them. Something changed in his face, not softness, but pride, as if her small voice was the strongest shield he could ever carry. The soldiers raised their weapons again, but now their anger was not just for him, it was for her too. They saw her as a traitor, broken, unworthy, and she realized with horror that her own kind might kill her for choosing the human. Daniel stepped forward, his stance like a wall between her and them. He growled a single word in his tongue. The soldiers did not understand, but they felt its meaning. A warning, a promise. The forest air grew sharp. Every leaf, every branch seemed to wait for blood. The girl's body shook, her voice gone. All she could do was press her hands against her chest and hope, because in that moment, she understood. Her life was no longer in the hands of her people. It was in the hands of the human she had once feared, the one who now stood ready to fight 3 warriors for her. And though her heart screamed in terror, a strange thought whispered through her mind. If he survived this, she would never fear him again, not ever. The forest held its breath. 3 alien soldiers faced Daniel, their blades sharp, their eyes burning with anger. Behind him the girl trembled, her body pressed against the cabin wall. She could not move, could not breathe, afraid of what would come next. Daniel stood tall, his weapon raised, his eyes steady. He was only one man, yet he looked unshaken. The soldiers sneered, circling him slowly. One of them spat words in their tongue. "Step aside, human. She belongs to us." The girl's chest tightened. That word again. Belongs. But Daniel did not move. He answered in his own tongue, firm and sharp. The soldiers did not understand, but his meaning was clear. No. The first soldier lunged forward. Metal clashed against Daniel's blade, the sound ringing through the trees. The girl gasped, her hands covering her mouth. She had never seen a human fight before. Daniel's movements were fast but controlled, each strike heavy, each block firm. The soldiers pressed him, two more joining the attack, steel against steel, sparks flying in the dawn light. The girl's fear grew with every blow. She wanted to scream, to stop them, but her voice was trapped. One soldier's strike cut across Daniel's arm. Blood splattered the ground, red and bright. Her heart dropped, tears filling her eyes. She had thought him unbreakable, untouchable. But now she saw he was only flesh, only human. And yet, even bleeding, he did not step back. With a roar, Daniel shoved one soldier aside. His blade slashed across another's weapon, knocking it from his hands. The soldiers growled in frustration. This was not the easy kill they had expected. The girl's body moved before her mind could stop it. She rushed forward, standing between Daniel and the soldiers, her small frame shaking, her arms spread wide. "No!" she shouted in her tongue, her voice breaking. The soldiers froze in disbelief, their own kin, protecting a human. Their eyes filled with disgust. One hissed, "You shame us." Daniel stepped in front of her again, pushing her gently back. His eyes burned with a fierce light. Even without words, she understood his meaning. "Stay behind me." Her chest ached, not with fear, but with something new. The fight ended not with blades, but with stares. The soldiers saw his fire, his refusal to surrender. They muttered curses, retreating into the shadows of the trees, their voices sharp with warning. This is not over. The forest grew quiet again. Daniel lowered his weapon, his breath heavy. Blood dripped from his wound, staining his sleeve. The girl rushed to him without thinking. She grabbed his arm, her hands shaking, her eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "No, no." In her language, he winced, but did not push her away. Instead, he let her hold him. For the first time, she touched him without fear, not as an enemy, not as a monster, but as someone she did not want to lose. Her tears fell onto his skin, mixing with blood and dirt. Daniel reached into his bag with his free hand. He pulled out cloth and pressed it to his wound, but she shook her head, snatching the cloth from him with trembling fingers. She pressed it herself, trying to stop the bleeding. Her face was pale, her voice broken. She whispered the same word again and again. Why? 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 Why fight for her? Why bleed for her? She could not understand, and yet she felt the answer in her heart. Daniel's eyes met hers. He spoke in his tongue, his voice soft despite the pain. She did not understand the words, but she understood the way he looked at her, as if she mattered, as if her life was worth more than chains or shame. Her hands shook as she tied the cloth around his arm. Tears blurred her vision. She remembered the chains, the abandonment, the cruelty of her people. And then she remembered the human, feeding her, healing her, shielding her. A bond had formed in silence. It did not need words. It did not need promises. It was carved in every act of kindness, every risk he took, every wound he bore for her. When the night came again, she did not sit in the corner as before. Instead, she curled close to the fire, near him. Her eyes watched his face until sleep pulled her down. And for the first time since her capture, she slept without fear, because in her heart, she knew. This human was no monster. He was her protector, her shield, her unspoken bond. Morning came soft and gray. Mist curled through the forest, covering the ground like a blanket. The cabin was silent except for the low crackle of dying fire. Daniel sat by the hearth, his wounded arm wrapped in cloth, his eyes heavy but watchful. The alien girl stirred slowly, her small frame wrapped in his spare blanket. When her eyes opened, the first thing she saw was him. He had not slept. He had stayed awake to guard her, even while bleeding. Her chest tightened with a feeling she could not name. She rose quietly, her bare feet soft against the wood. Daniel turned his head, and their eyes met. For a long moment, no words passed between them, but the silence itself fell heavy with meaning. She pointed to his arm, her brow furrowing in worry. He shrugged as if the wound was nothing, but she shook her head sharply. Her voice cracked as she whispered in her language, "Not nothing. You bled for me." He did not understand her words, yet something in her trembling voice made him soften. He gave a small nod, the closest thing to an answer he could give. And somehow, that nod eased her heart. The day passed slowly. Daniel worked to strengthen the cabin walls, adding wood and stones. The girl helped clumsily, carrying small branches, holding nails. Every time she stumbled, he caught her, steadying her without a word. It was strange, how the silence no longer felt frightening. Once, silence meant waiting for pain, waiting for death. But now, silence meant safety. It meant she could exist without fear. Beside him, by afternoon, she dared to step outside alone. The forest whispered around her, alive and green. For the first time, she did not see it as a prison. She saw it as a place where a new life could begin. But her peace did not last. From the trees, she heard faint voices, distant but familiar. Her blood turned cold. The soldiers had not given up. They were still searching. She ran back to the cabin, breathless. Daniel looked up instantly, seeing the terror in her eyes. He did not need to hear the words. He knew. They were coming again. He checked his weapon, jaw tight. But she rushed forward, grabbing his arm, shaking her head. Her eyes pleaded with him, her voice breaking. No more blood. Please. She could not bear to see him bleed again. Not for her. Daniel stared at her, conflicted. He wanted to protect her, but he also understood her fear. Slowly he lowered his weapon. Instead he reached out and touched her shoulder lightly. That touch carried a message she understood without words. If they come, I will not surrender you. I will stand. Tears filled her eyes. She nodded, because she finally believed him. When evening came, the soldiers' voices faded away into the distance. They had not found the cabin this time. The girl sat by the fire, her hands trembling from relief. Daniel sat across from her, watching silently. At last, she gathered her courage. She pointed to her chest, then to him, and in her broken voice she said the only word she thought he might understand. Safe. Daniel blinked, surprised. For the first time since they had met, a small smile touched his lips. It was faint, tired, but real, and it warmed her more than any fire could. That night, she did not curl far away in the corner. She moved closer to him, her body trembling not from fear, but from choice. When she lay down, her hand rested near his. Her heart pounded, but she did not pull away. Daniel did not move either. He only let her hand stay. And in that unspoken closeness, something stronger than fear was born, a bond that neither chains nor blood could break. The girl closed her eyes, whispering softly, I thought you would kill me, but you gave me life. Daniel did not understand her words, but he heard the softness in her tone, and that was enough. When dawn came again, they stepped out of the cabin together. The world was still dangerous, soldiers still hunted, but for the first time she was not afraid. Because now she had a protector, and he had someone who believed in him. Together, they walked into the forest, two figures, one human, one alien, bound not by chains, not by fear, but by trust. It was the start of something new, not just survival, but hope. Not just two strangers, but two lives intertwined. And though the future was uncertain, the girl knew one truth deep in her heart. She had expected death, but the human had given her a new beginning, and she would never let go of that gift, not ever.